Hello, my dear viewers. I'm Olga Demchuk, a researcher of the inner world of personality. Today, I would like to explore the topic of depression together with you. Alternatively, I have titled this video About a Meaningless Life. What is depression? How do we create it for ourselves? This is the last thing we want to admit. The underlying causes of depression are almost always projected outward. But if we project, as those individuals who have been consistently watching my channel for a considerable period of time already know and understand, then we inevitably remain completely helpless and without recourse. Wow! If it depends only on external factors, then it means we can only influence those factors, and I can't do anything with myself. And then my emotional state is perceived as a given, something I cannot influence. So, what is a person with depression? Today I have prepared some slides for you. When a person sinks into depression, they inevitably become fixated within themselves. Their contact with the outside world ceases. In other words, they are like someone who shuts themselves in a room and tightly draws the dark curtains. They do not see the outside world, and what they see inside, they trust completely. When you ask a person with depression what is inside, they say darkness, blackness, and meaninglessness, DBM. To help you better absorb the material I am sharing with you now to understand it, and to join me as a fellow explorer, recall your own experience of sinking into depression when it seemed that everything around you was darkness, blackness, and meaninglessness. Now bring to mind that state, that episode when you were immersed in it. So, darkness, blackness, and meaninglessness. This little bow at the top symbolizes the knot that ties up the bag in which the person is enclosed, and from inside they look out and see only this blackness. I'm sure you've seen those art installations where, as you change your position, what you see transforms. At first it might look like a set of stripes, and then you move a little, and suddenly it's a face or something completely different. A person who is in a depressive state sees this within themselves and completely trusts what they see. In other words, their perspective, their point of view, is as if they are fixed in one position. They cannot move and see things differently. If you tell a person with depression, look out the window, the sun is shining, the birds are singing, they will perceive it as mockery. They do not see that window. They remain in that dark room with the curtains drawn. And when we try to pull them out of there, for some reason it doesn't work. When we try to pull ourselves out of depression, for some reason it doesn't work either. There is a reason for this fixation. Let's try to delve into it now. So, what appears to be objective is actually an emotional state. When I realize that this is my emotional state, I can take ownership of these emotions and understand that I am the source. I am the one generating this darkness that fills my personal space. When a person is in depression, their state is something like, I cannot possess what I desire. This desired thing can be anything, but in depression there is always a lack of what is desired. And even if you don't understand exactly what you're depressed about, you can be sure that it exists. Identifying this cause is the first step toward overcoming depression. That is to understand what I am missing, what I desire but do not have. Someone from the outside could give me this desired thing, but they don't. I could arrange this desired thing for myself, but I am unable to do so. And that is why we often place an excessive amount of hope on someone else. Why is that? Because we clearly understand that we cannot arrange it for ourselves. It feels as if our only hope is in someone from the outside. But since we generate this state ourselves from within, even when something external is given to us, we reject it because we do not feel happiness, as we are the generator of relentless unhappiness. So let's explore this very thing we desire, this fixation. Of course, I am presenting all of this schematically. As you know, there is no X-ray for the inner world. I make these forays into my own states. I have repeatedly experienced depression, and I try to broadcast to you from there. Of course, I draw not only on my own experience, but also on the experience of my many clients. So, when a person describes depression, they are describing this very picture. That is, they say, I am small, I am insignificant, I can't do anything, I feel bad, it's dark and scary here, and so on and so forth. In other words, a person coming, for example, to a session with a psychotherapist or describing their state will only describe this small part of the picture. But the whole picture looks like this. This is that very desired state I mentioned to you earlier. When we try to describe this desired state in words, we can conditionally call it the ideal self. In other words, this ideal self possesses what is desired, or it is the desired self, that is, the self that has what is wanted. It's as if there's an alternative version of myself where I possess this desired thing. And this desired state in some way puts pressure on our personality. And the more unattainable this desired state is, the more impossible it seems, the greater the pain, sense of worthlessness and depression we feel here. When we talk about the magnitude of what is desired, we are referring specifically to its magnitude, not in relation to reality. For example, when we lose something, as they say, an irreparable loss, such as the passing of a loved one, in this case, the desired thing cannot be realized. In other words, the discrepancy with reality is enormous. Or a person, their personality, their particular structure, this structure simply cannot possess it. For example, a person wants a family, but due to the way they are, they experience forced loneliness. I have a video on this, and so on. When they are near someone, they cannot stay. They unconsciously break off the contact themselves. They don't understand why, but they create all the conditions so that no one is around them. In other words, their configuration simply cannot receive this. Sometimes I dive deeper into topics like this in my webinars, but for now, those are only available in Russian. And here, some people write, "You haven't told us everything." Of course, not everything. It's a 15-minute video. So we have a desire that puts pressure on us. The less it aligns with reality, the greater the pain will be. If we take a closer look at what is happening here, at the relationships involved, we can see the pressure of this hunger. It's the pressure of this desire on the real person. In other words, in essence and in effect, our alternative self, the one who truly possesses what we deeply desire and yearn for in our most profound dreams, exerts considerable pressure on our real present self, persistently demanding and compelling us to provide and manifest what is truly desired and sought after. Demanding, in whatever manner or form, regardless of the specific method or approach, to ultimately obtain what is truly desired, either by successfully acquiring it from another individual or entity, or by diligently achieving it entirely by ourselves. This is why many people who enter new professions, why we are afraid to change our line of work or our lives, because we immediately encounter this attack, this pressure. We cannot instantly get what we want, and it seems as if we are unable to stretch this process out over time. Even people who have lost something, who are facing health problems, perhaps they have just learned about some illness. In other words, there is an alternative version of reality where I was not sick, but it is no longer possible to return to it. And this inability to accept that it is gone prevents a person from avoiding depression. That is, it is possible to be ill and not be depressed. It is possible to experience loss and not be depressed. I'm not saying that it's necessarily right not to be depressed. Here, it depends on many factors. But what I am saying is that understanding the cause of depression will make it easier to cope with and will shorten its duration. That is the only point I am making right now. Many people say, well, it's impossible not to feel I got sick, so why should I be happy? I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that it can be lessened. If this has already happened, you can end up poisoning even your last days of life, poison the lives of your loved ones, and leave in darkness and emptiness. Or you can choose to live those days differently. The same goes for the loss of loved ones. You can poison the rest of your life and the lives of those who remain close to you, and so on and so forth. So what we're talking about now is reducing the intensity. In this illustration, you can see exactly this attack, this constant pressure. And because the real self cannot provide what is desired, it feels worthless, insignificant. It is precisely from this attack that a person feels pain. The pain and depression is exactly the pain from these attacks. In other words, a person is like a beaten dog, but they don't think in terms of, I am beating myself. It seems to them that they are beaten down by circumstances. And when a person tries to understand who they are more likely to choose that desired image, the one that supposedly possesses something. And in their fantasies, they continue to possess it. They can't let go of the situation, they can't accept that it's over, that they've lost something, they simply can't do it. No, I can do it, but in reality I am insignificant. And by choosing this state, it's as if we become God. But this God has only one subject, one servant, that small and worthless one who cannot carry out his commands. And a person does not realize this part. From all my conversations with people experiencing depression, and from my own time in depression, I noticed that we always want to stay in this part, to describe things from within it. And that makes sense, because only our real self is capable of feeling pain. Our phantom self, our imagined self, does not experience pain. All the pain is here, and that's why we describe this part. But this other part seems to be somewhere off screen. It lingers in the air, and yet at the same time, it has a tremendous real impact on us. When we talk about what is desired, we are talking about something like a sieve. That's the metaphor I chose, so that not just technical-minded people, but also those with associative or artistic thinking can have more objects to help them understand. It's like a sieve through which everything I possess pours out. And my desired thing, it's so charged, enormous in size, it would get stuck in this sieve. You see? This is what I am capable of, what I want. And this is what I want, but do not have. So I sift through my whole life, devaluing everything I have. So when we talk about meaninglessness, about depression, we are really talking about devaluation. We strip things of their meaning. We are like Medusa, who looks at something and turns this living thing into a lifeless, meaningless stone. That's what we are like in depression. And it is precisely the emotional charge of what we desire that turns it into an idée fixe. It's as if we can only think about this one thing and nothing else. Then, in these attacks of the ideal self on the real self, we become as if we have no skin. So, asking a person in depression to do something, to give them additional responsibilities, is cruel, because the person is already like a burdened animal, overloaded by their desired self, by what it wants, by these attacks. And that's why everything is perceived so acutely. Sounds are loud. Even the slightest discomfort completely flattens the person. It's just too much. It doesn't fit. It doesn't fit. That is, the whole psyche is absorbed in processing this grief, this misfortune, this impossibility of having what one wants. Any extra burden feels completely unbearable, to the point where it's impossible even to get out of bed. That's how exhausted the person is, just by themselves. A person in depression is harsh, self-absorbed, and cynical. And in this profound cynicism, in this complete devaluation of others, they ultimately find the only conceivable way to truly raise their own self-esteem. And this cynicism, this urge to devalue everything, takes over. It's a false attempt to escape from this sense of inadequacy. But the person only becomes more embittered and even more, and that's not the way out. And this isn't right, and that isn't right either. And the person keeps digging themselves in deeper and deeper. When we look at depression from the inside, we see ourselves as miserable, but from the outside we appear repulsive. I have experienced depression, and I'm speaking about myself as well. When I'm in a depressive state, of course, people around me just want to get away. And only those individuals who are very close, who are truly able to endure it, are the ones who steadfastly stick by a person experiencing depression. And this inherent inability to fully understand what it is truly like for those around us, it ultimately prevents us from being able to effectively stop it. That is, when you realize that you are becoming toxic, and you are poisoning the space around you, that at least can somehow make you pause. But a person is so caught up in depression, in pain, that they don't think about others. This is the large amount of pain that we create for ourselves by attacking ourselves. Ideally, it arises from self-aggression. In other words, a person has a lot of self-aggression. A lot of self-aggression will inevitably generate a lot of aggression. That is, a person becomes dissatisfied, aggressive toward the world, and of course toward their loved ones. And a large amount of aggression, self-aggression, generates a lot of devaluation, and life seems to become even more meaningless. And a person ends up in a vicious circle, a closed loop. That is, they find themselves in this kind of hopelessness. Why is there such hopelessness in depression? And what keeps us stuck there? I've come back to the question I started with. You see, in order to answer it, I had to explain all these mechanisms. So at the beginning, we talked about the fact that something keeps us stuck. As long as a person agrees with the idea that they are worthless and incapable, their ideal self seems to stop demanding anything from them. In other words, the more I suffer, the more insignificant and useless I feel, the better my excuse or indulgence from the demands of my ideal self becomes. I keep showing it that I can't do anything, because if I show it that I can do something, it will start demanding that impossible ideal from me. So in fact, I have to simulate my own worthlessness and inadequacy in front of my ideal self so that it doesn't attack me. Staying in pain is a way to protect myself from my own self-aggression. In other words, as long as I am suffering, I am not attacking myself. As soon as I feel even a little bit of joy, as soon as my mood lifts even slightly, I become afraid of it myself and sink back into depression and pain, so that I don't start making these unrealistic, unreasonable demands of myself. And so, by remaining in suffering, I reduce self-aggression and therefore the pain as well. I become fixated on this. I can't see happiness or joy because I immediately attack myself. If you want to learn more, my book is available in English and it goes into these questions in depth. You'll find the link in the video description. You can also check out the other chapters. For a fuller picture, they're all in that book. And of course, don't forget to subscribe to this channel so you don't miss upcoming videos. If you'd like to support the channel, the easiest way is to like this video. It really makes a difference. Feel free to share your thoughts in the comments. What topics matter most to you, and what would you like to see next? See you soon.